Welcome to We Politics, brought to you by the Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board. I'm your host, Rob Miller. During this series, we will be talking with the candidates in the Windsor and Essex ridings. All 17 candidates were invited. We will be talking with Margaret Villamizar after a word from our sponsor.
Are you passionate about a particular sport? Would you like to combine it with your education? Are you thinking about a career in one of the many rewarding construction-related trades? Do you love subjects like science, technology, engineering, or math? Take a look at the academies of the Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board. You'll be glad you did. And years from now, you'll look back on your high school days as the best times of your life. The academies of the Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board. We're with you all the way.
Margaret Villamizar is the candidate for the Marxist Leninist Party in Windsor West. She is a retired English as a second language assessor. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Rob.
You've been a candidate for the Marxist Leninist Party, I'm sorry to say, for as long as I can remember. I won't date us, but it's been quite a while. What convinced you to run again?
Well, there's always a need for alternatives to be presented to the electorate, alternatives to the system of party rule where the people really don't have a central role to play. You get to cast a vote, you're courted for your vote, but after that you don't have a say. Our party talks about the central thing being the need for democratic renewal so that people actually have mechanisms where we can take part in decision making and governance. And as long as that situation persists, I'm personally inspired to run to represent it.
Well, you and the rest of your family, I remember interviewing your husband and your son during other elections.
True.
What do you see as the most important local issue in Windsor West in this election?
I don't think it's really separate from the national issue, that people need a say in things that really profoundly affect our lives. In Windsor, the industrial base here is being really played havoc with because the people don't have a say in what kind of relations Canada has, let's say, with the US in terms of who controls the economy. The effect on people's jobs is quite apparent. It's dramatic these days with the impending shutdown of one shift at Chrysler's, with NEMAC also just taking off because it's decided, even though it got Canadian taxpayers' money, like Chrysler did in a much bigger way, that it's more profitable for them to move elsewhere. There's decisions about the new mega hospital, decisions about the second span of the Ambassador Bridge, which were all made really without the input or let alone control of citizens. So I think that issue needs to be addressed before we can even think that other things which we have as our objectives can be realized.
But don't we elect representatives to make sure we have input into these decisions? Isn't that the parliamentary system?
Input in terms of being consulted, but then no decision-making power, no power to recall people who are elected to allegedly represent us, who therefore at one point decide that they can't do that because their party from the very top levels is dictating something else. That's not an acceptable type of a system for a modern democracy in the 21st century. People are demanding a say. They're feeling very much left out of decision making. Canada's foreign policy isn't even being discussed in this election. Yes, yet that's a very important thing. So we need to have more than just a vote every 4 years.
So how would we do that?
One of the ways that, there's several things. Obviously people need to have the ability to recall elected representatives based on whether or not they feel that they've been fulfilling their responsibilities. There should also be a formal process of selection of candidates, not the nomination process that right now is in the hands of the parties to pick and choose people who they wish. Citizens then are presented with candidates and told who their options are. We believe there shouldn't be public funding of the parties based on those who are in Parliament getting votes. The process, the electoral process, should be funded by the government so that there is something like a free and fair election, but not the parties. Those are just some of the mechanisms that I can mention as being important for a change.
About the Marxist Leninist Party, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about your party?
I'm not sure that there's one thing you can say. First of all, information is not provided fully about all the candidates and all the parties running, whether it's the media that are controlled by interests that decide who's electable and who's not. So it's even blacked out. People don't have information, period. They may be influenced by sort of Cold War thinking about communism and what Marxism-Leninism means without considering the platform that our party is putting forward. Our party's whole stand is really that people need to be empowered, and it's a fight we need to wage ourselves to empower ourselves and find the ways to do it. People speaking out, making their concerns known is a beginning. If people don't know that, it's because the word maybe hasn't gotten out that that is what we're running in elections for.
Okay. Well, even though you're not in favor of the current structure, I'm going to ask you some questions about different issues in the
That's
party.
fair.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you support a national pharmacare plan?
I think that coverage for pharmaceuticals that people need, as well as dental care and other things, should be part of the type of health care that Canadians should be guaranteed. Not just a policy that maybe, is partially implemented based on paying out huge sums of money to the international monopolies that actually control the pharmaceutical industry. I think our Constitution should guarantee health care as a right, which includes medications that people need vitally, which are out of reach by any standard at the moment for many people. And I think that would imply having public control and ownership over the whole idea of pharmaceuticals as well. Research, is carried on. Drugs are released on the market to make as much money as possible, sometimes without proper testing. So I think that should be something that is looked at as a public service.
And you mentioned dental as well. So that leads me to my next question, which is what would the Marxist-Leninist Party do? What would you do specifically for the seniors in Windsor West?
Seniors are a section of the population that are facing a lot of hardship, whether it's proper housing, whether it's being able to afford medications, whether it's anything, the food costs and so on. People should be guaranteed, as I said, the things that they need to live a decent Canadian standard of living, and that should be theirs by right. They shouldn't have to fight for that kind of thing or beg or go do without. So I think the whole question of what the public funds go for at this time should be a very big discussion. At the moment, our party puts it this way, that Canada's economy basically is run by paying the rich in order to try and get them to invest here, as they call it, but there's really no control over anything that these big, many times global corporations do. The resources that are available to Canada, I'm sure, are adequate to provide for the needs of seniors, as well as of families with small children, as well as provide a well-rounded health care, but we need to take control of the direction of our economy and what's done with our resources.
How would you help and attract younger voters?
It's important that young people not feel disempowered or marginalized or cut off from the political system. And I don't blame them if they currently feel that way. Our call is for people to be in action. One of our main slogans is empower yourself now. That actually means take a stand, put it forward. Don't let other people be the ones who are going to decide your future, because we've seen that there's a lot of problems with counting on political parties to fulfill whatever they promise or commit to during elections. It simply doesn't happen so often. Young people are hugely in action on the question of climate change and the environment, and I think that's a very good sign that they're taking it in their own hands and demanding that changes be made, and they're not settling for, platitudes.
On that, what would you say is the most pressing environmental problem in Windsor West?
in Windsor West, I mean, it's a large area, right? There are problems with the flooding that come from the effects of climate change, among other things. There's certainly problems of pollution of our waterways, our air, what's been put in the river, what's coming across the border. Again, it comes down to if we had better control over what was happening in our country and in the direction of our economy, we wouldn't be in a position of having the inability to deal with what the U.S. sends our way, and in fact is a large contributor to the pollution that we experience here. The relations that Canada have with the U.S. are one of appeasing them at this time, trying to sort of stay out of their target range, and Canada is doing some very shameful things overseas in terms of joining U.S. in its aggressive projects against other countries. And that shows up also. Canada's integrated with Homeland Security now. The border has become a real problem for people, and pollution that comes from the U.S., as well as things that are emitted here by the big polluters, should be something that we have a say and control over. But we have to fight to get that control.
Well, speaking of the U.S., what do you think of the most recent renegotiated NAFTA agreement?
I think that the problem is still there. This is a trade agreement that Canada has basically surrendered sovereignty, Canadian sovereign control over our own economy, to these large global outfits that basically run the roost. The workers in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada did not have a say in this agreement. We don't even know if it's going to be ratified, obviously. But Canada cannot even trade, let's say, with China and certain other countries without U.S. permission being granted. There's no mention whatsoever of climate change, which supposedly is a big issue for, the people who are supporting the new NAFTA. So I don't think it's any solution to the problems. It's not done, and it's not likely to do anything about what's happening to the companies that come here, take Canadian public funds, and then leave when they decide that they can make more money elsewhere. So it's not a solution. I think it should be abrogated. We should have relations based on mutual benefit and development, and that should be the way we conduct trade relations with all countries, not a subservient sort of relationship with a superpower.
Well, on that note, we have, at least based on what the economists say, we have a relatively strong economy right now, but a lot of people are apprehensive. And so what would your party do for Windsor West and Windsor as a whole to retain and attract more manufacturing? You mentioned Chrysler were losing a shift. Mm-hmm. What would you do to try to stave off that kind of thing?
It certainly wouldn't be based on throwing more money at these companies to try and play this game of, if you don't give us what we want, we'll go to another jurisdiction. That is unsustainable. That's been a failed policy. So for sure that would be rejected. We call for a new direction in the economy, an economy that reflects input and an important part of the control by the people who actually produce the goods. They should also decide the goods that are needed for a well-rounded Canadian domestic economy, first and foremost, before deciding that we're mainly an exporting nation. There should be definite controls in place so that if public monies in some way are invested in enterprises, that those are guaranteed to do the kinds of things that benefit the Canadian economy and the people's needs themselves. Manufacturing is important, and we should have, I think, greater manufacturing of the goods that Canada needs here as opposed to importing things and then exporting what we manufacture. Manufacturing is being wrecked under the present system with these global monopolies coming and going and seizing more and more important parts of our economy. Those are some things that I can say that affect Windsor West, but other parts of Canada too.
What would you say about trade with other countries other than the U.S.? We do a lot of trade with China, for example,
right.
But yet I've seen you march in peace demonstrations. You probably disagree with the domestic attitudes towards freedom in China.
The domestic attitudes, you mean, that are taken by the government of China?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I haven't spoken about that. I think Canada's role is to worry about the human rights in its own country, as opposed to getting Canadians to line up behind their position against another government's decision of how it runs its affairs, and to use human rights as a card to kind of say, look at what's bad over there, forget what I'm doing here. Canada should have trade with all kinds of countries, as I said, based on relations of equality. Of course, there's differences in economic power, but those should be trade relations that are based on mutual benefits, strictly speaking. And we shouldn't discard trade with all kinds of countries. It's not easy to trade with behemoths, like China, no doubt, as well, but the US is being the main one that we spend most of our time dealing with. Those relations should be based on equality. That's the basis for actually dealing with all the problems that have come to the surface in international relations today. If nations were treated one another as equal parties, as the UN supposedly regards them in the General Assembly, and mutual benefit were at the heart of things, and friendship between peoples, I think we'd have a lot less problems.
Okay, so we're out of time. Now you can take a minute to pitch to the audience why they should vote for you in Windsor West.
So the vote in Windsor West, like in elsewhere in Canada, should be about what ways people can find to actually have control over the country's affairs, all the affairs. We're saying that the party system does not allow that to Canadians. It's a rule by political parties. We want Canadians actually to be empowered themselves, to have a role in governance, to have a role in decision making about all the affairs that affect our lives. So our party stands for that. It stands first and foremost for having a renewal of the electoral and the political process, so people actually can play that role. One of our slogans is empower yourself now, and that means let's not hope until maybe another government is elected to see if that happens. We should take action now. People should remain in action, those who are fighting for their rights and for the rights of all, because that's the kind of step that we need to express what it is that's missing and the role we need to play. So a vote for Marxist Leninist Party is a vote for empowerment, and it's a statement that you can make that you reject the old ways of doing things that have not provided solutions.
Thank you for coming in today, and good luck in the campaign.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again real soon.